20 minutes later, my phone rang. Robert had passed peacefully in his sleep. But here's what I've never told anyone. What keeps me awake even now, years later? What makes me check the locks twice before bed and leave lights on in empty rooms? I wasn't the last person to see Robert alive. As I walked down that hallway, leaving his room for the final time, the silence felt absolute. Even the usual sounds of the building seemed muffled, distant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me like grasping fingers. I glanced back one last time. There, standing beside Robert's bed, was a small figure in a white dress. The little girl Marcus had warned me about. She was holding Robert's hand, her small pale fingers interlaced with his weathered ones. And she was smiling. Not the innocent smile of a child, but something else. Something knowing. Something hungry. Her eyes met mine for just a moment, and in them I saw an ancient patience. A willingness to wait, to guide, to collect what was owed. I blinked, and she was gone. But the impression remained, burned into my memory like a photograph exposed to too much light. Some places are thin between worlds. Places where the dying linger just a little too long. Where something waits in the shadows between heartbeats, between breaths, between the moment when life ends and whatever comes next begins. Something that's always hungry, always patient, always there when the time comes to cross over. If you've worked in healthcare, in hospice care, in places where death is a daily visitor, you know what I'm talking about. You felt that presence, seen those shadows, heard those sounds that have no source. But maybe it's better not to talk about it. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe some things get stronger when you give them voice. The maintenance logs showed no electrical problems, no shorts, no loose connections, nothing that could explain what was happening. But the room stayed cold, and that oppressive feeling never went away. Veterans are different when they're dying. There's a strength there, a code they live by even when everything else falls away. Robert served in Vietnam, came home to marry his sweetheart, built a life, grew old together. When Alzheimer's took her mind, he moved into memory care to stay by her side, even as his own cancer ate him alive. We'd sit on the patio during my breaks. The night air would carry the scent of jasmine from the garden, mixing with cigarette smoke and the sterile smell that seemed to follow us everywhere. He'd tell me stories about the war, about choices that haunt you, about learning to live with the weight of what you've done to survive. As the cancer took hold, Robert started seeing things. His childhood dog, wagging its tail at the foot of his bed. Enemy soldiers standing in the corners of his room, watching him with hollow eyes. The staff thought it was the morphine, the dying brain's last desperate attempt to make sense of approaching darkness. But I saw them too. Shadows that moved independently of any light source. Cold spots that followed you around the room. The sensation of being watched by something just out of sight. Robert's room felt crowded even when he was alone, as if invisible visitors gathered there each night. The night Robert died, I went to check on him after my shift ended. Found him sitting up in bed, more lucid than he'd been in weeks. His eyes were clear, focused, different somehow, like he could see things the rest of us couldn't. His fingers, cold as winter, wrapped around my wrist with surprising strength. We looked at each other, two men who understood that some goodbyes are sacred. The weight of that moment settled between us like a blanket. But it wasn't just the girl. Death itself seemed wrong in that place. Mr. Thompson was my first real lesson in how the dying cling to life. Stage 4 cancer had reduced him to nothing but skin stretched over bones, his mind lost somewhere between this world and the next. For 4 months, he defied every medical prediction. For months of existing in a state that should have been impossible. His breathing was so shallow you had to watch his chest carefully to see if he was still alive. The sound was like paper rustling in the wind. His daughters finally came, traveling from 3 different states to gather around his bed. Through tears, they whispered the words he needed to hear. Permission to let go. 5 minutes. That's all it took after they spoke those words. 5 minutes, and Harold Thompson was gone. But Harold wasn't finished with us. The call button in his room started going off every single night. At first, we thought it was faulty wiring. I'm an engineer by training. I understand electronics, wave physics, the behavior of light and shadow. But when I stepped into that room to investigate, everything I knew about physics went out the window. The darkness was heavier there, thicker, like breathing through wet wool. The temperature dropped 15 degrees the moment you crossed the threshold. My breath came out in visible puffs, even though the thermostat read 72 degrees. The windows faced the same direction as every other room. The ambient lighting was identical. The layout, the fixtures, everything was the same. Except it wasn't. Night after night, that button would sound. We'd rush in, find the room empty, reset the system. The button would be warm to the touch, as if someone had just pressed it. But the presence in that room was malevolent. Hungry. It made your skin crawl and your hair stand on end. Eventually, we stopped responding. Eventually, even the call button gave up. I quit my nursing home job without notice 3 years ago, left my badge on the desk, and never went back. Until now, I've never told anyone why. There are things that happen in the darkness of nursing homes that families never hear about. Things we don't put in the reports. Things that make seasoned caregivers quit without notice. I worked the night shift at Willowbrook Manor for 3 years. 3 years of watching over the dying, the forgotten, the lost. But some nights, they watch back. The smell of disinfectant never really covers up the other smells. The ones that cling to your clothes, seep into your skin. Death has an odor, sweet and sour at the same time, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. You learn to breathe through your mouth after a while. My supervisor Marcus was a 20-year veteran. His weathered face told stories of 2 decades spent in these halls, and his tired eyes had seen too much. During our smoke breaks behind the building, he'd warn me about certain rooms, certain residents. The way his cigarette would tremble in his fingers when he talked about the 3rd floor made my stomach turn. He told me there was a pattern here, something that fed on the dying. And talking about it, he whispered, glancing nervously at the darkened windows above us. Talking about it makes it stronger. There was Sarah, one of our oldest nurses. Sweet woman who'd worked there for nearly 2 decades. Marcus mentioned she'd seen the little girl too, a decade ago, in the same room where Mrs. Henderson now lay dying. The same room where cold spots appeared without explanation, where shadows moved against the light. The fluorescent bulbs in that hallway flickered more than the others. Maintenance replaced them monthly, but they'd burn out faster than anywhere else in the building. The air felt different there too, heavier somehow, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the pressure drops and your ears pop.